Exploration games have always been one of my favorites. However, the Metroidvania genre was what hooked me up like a heroin addict. I remember playing Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the first time and getting my mind blown in every discovery. Every time I thought I had found out every path and secret, something new would come up not long after and inject a new dose in my veins. The biggest aspect that differentiates the Vania from the Metroid is that the former mostly focuses its gameplay around being a collectathon and leveling system, which makes it a more cathartic yet easy experience, while the latter focuses more on platforming and a methodical approach which provides a greater challenge, albeit with an even greater sense of accomplishment. Hollow Knight was released in 2017 by the indie studio Team Cherry, and ever since then it's been acclaimed as one of the best in the genre, and has garnered a huge following of devoted fans. The game itself was much more on the Metroid side than the Vania, but it does so masterfully. However, even though I'm a big fan who's played it more times than I can remember, it's still not without its faults, and in this review/analysis, I want to delve a bit deeper into what the game got right and what could have been improved. In Hollow Knight, you take the role of the Knight, a cute bug that has just arrived at the edges of a ruined kingdom, and it's your task as the player to explore every nook and cranny to uncover its secrets. Right off the bat, the gorgeous painting-like hand-drawn characters and scenery set the tone for the game's atmosphere, gloomy and eerie. It makes sense, after all, you're mostly exploring an underground ruined kingdom and not Disneyland. The natural geography restricts the color palette to just a few cold tones. As a consequence of that, the game sells a more realistic immersion. However, that does come at a cost of many locations having a samey feeling, as if they're a copy of each other, even if under inspection they're clearly not. Another big reason for that samey feeling is that most of the game's backgrounds and tiling, albeit beautiful, are simplistic, which is expected since we can't forget that this is a relatively low-budget Kickstarter game. And speaking of simplicity, the gameplay also falls under that same definition. You have only a nail, some skill for it, and a handful of spells to dispatch your opposition. And honestly, you don't need more than that. Hollow Knight is one of those games that are easy to play but hard to master. It requires a more methodical and strategic approach to overcome its challenges. Although the Knight's movement can be slow, the action is hectic, requiring constant attention and quick reflexes. Couple that with the fact that your health pool is quite limited, and to replenish this game's mana, or so as it's called, you need to be proactive and hit enemies as much as possible. Moreover, Soul is also used as healing, further cementing that in this game, the offense is the best defense. All of that combined makes Hollow Knight by far the most difficult Metroidvania I've ever played. Team Cherry's philosophy was to make a vast world in which the player feels lost while he's keeping the difficulty for the entirety of the experience. And although they were able to achieve that, I think they have overdone it to a point that, in some cases, it ended up backfiring and hurting the experience. For instance, Metroidvanias are known for rewarding the players quite often as they explore and the more they explore. Hollow Knight also does that, but the rewards are limited in usability, essence, and frequency. In other words, the most common rewards are usually money or soul token, while meaningful rewards are infrequent. And even then, things like charms and nail skills feel more like a trade-off rather than a straightforward additional upgrade. Look, I understand what the developers were going for, but even within their philosophy, there are some contradictions and counterproductive decisions. The charm system is a pretty good example of that. Because of the way it's set up, only a few of them are used, while the others just sit there collecting dust. A very simple way of fixing that would be to create charm tiers. Tier 1 would be only available to charms like Gathering Swarm, Sprint Master, Dream Wielder, and a few other ones. Tier 2 would be for Dash Master, Sharp Shadow, Stalwart Shell, etc. Tier 3 would be for Shaman Stone, Quick Nail, Mark of the Pride, Spell Twister, Unbreakable Strength, Wayward Compass, since I do want to respect the developer's intention to make the player lost, and the other powerful ones. Give about 3 notches to Tier 1, 2 notches to Tier 2, and keep the same amount of notches for Tier 3. Make it so that a lower tier charm can be equipped in higher tiers, but not the opposite. That would make less powerful charms more useful, while it's giving the player a greater sense of reward. On top of that, having both Sprint and Dash Master equipped at the same time without displacing the more powerful charms would also fix another common issue that many players have with the game, which is how slow the Knight is to traverse such a humongous world. Would that make the game a tad easier? Yes, but it wouldn't break it. Hollow Knight is already brutal as it is, and charms on tier 1 and 2 wouldn't change that. Another issue related to the pacing concerns the benches. Now, benches are used to save your session and most importantly, recover your health. The problem is, benches are located quite sparsely and randomly, and not in locations where you might most likely die, which in this game almost always means the bosses. That makes it so that if you die on a boss, you gotta go on a trip, sometimes short, sometimes long, but a trip nonetheless. While I don't advocate adding more benches, I'd certainly move the existing ones to every room before a boss fight. While on the subject of dying, when the knight dies, it leaves a shade behind. You restart the game at the last bench you rested, with diminished soul and no money. In order to recuperate your soul meter and money, you have to travel all the way back to your shade and kill it. Kill it with fire. If you die without regaining your shade, you lose all of the money you had. Why does a game that has its essence built around exploration have such a punishing system for what it encourages the player to do? It makes no sense. The various hazards you find along the way are more than enough as obstacles. There is absolutely no need to have yet another layer of punishment on top of that, which only serves to discourage players to do the very thing the game wants them to do. I'd even go a step further and say that not only the shade system shouldn't have been implemented, but also that exploration rewards should have been present not only as a means to an end, but also as the end itself. A perfect example of that is in the games Ys 8 and 9, in which there's an NPC that rewards you for charting every 10% of the map. Now, that's how you encourage exploration. Now, while most upgrades and items can be found in the wild, there are quite a bunch that can only be bought from shops, which is again another questionable decision by the developers. You'd think a game with such sparse upgrades would spread out every one of them naturally as to increase the player's sense of reward even further. And while I can understand Team Cherry's reasoning behind it, which is probably to give players a way to make the knight stronger without solely relying on exploration, it introduces a boring and grindy way to acquire things. Honestly, I don't like the fact that you have to grind to buy important upgrades. Granted, if you never lose your money and find all artifacts, at the end of the game you have enough money to buy pretty much everything. But most players, especially newcomers, will probably lose their savings and will have to grind quite a bunch. One item in particular that I think was a mistake to be sold is the Lumafly Lantern. At the beginning of the game, you have the option to go to a location called Resting Grounds. But in order to do that, you need the lantern. But since it's so early in the game and the item is expensive, you won't have enough money for it and you're forced to grind for quite a bit. I'd have loved if I at least had the option to find most, if not all, of those items in the wild, perhaps behind bosses or secret places. Speaking of secrets, the story is straightforward but quite sparse and vague. You can derive the overall meaning of the knight's journey by simply playing casually, but you definitely have to pay close attention. There are deeper layers of a plot to find, but the player is expected not only to dig harder, but to also put everything together. One way that could have immensely helped the understanding of both the story and the intricacies of the plot would be to implement what many other games do, which is to have a history timeline that makes a brief summary of the story so far and a diary that records every or at least the most crucial interactions the player has with NPCs. In any case, I prefer something more straightforward, so I didn't really appreciate how cryptic the story and plot elements are, both from a gameplay and narrative standpoint. I'd say games like Undertale and Iconoclast are more to my taste, a simply to follow story with just enough openness to keep the game alive with the endless furies. I for one was confused at the end, and as with many others, had to resort to external sources for clarity, namely Mossbag. Fully understanding the story, or what there is to understand, gave me a much higher level of appreciation for this game, and I fully empathize with how excited the fandom is about its world and characters. I just wish I had gotten that level of appreciation while in my first playthrough. The game had 4 free DLCs, which mostly had bosses and rebalanced the gameplay, and while they're fine, I expected a bit more, especially from the last one, which was the biggest, and it ended up being basically a boss rush. 2 of those DLCs added quite a bit more plot, but Green Troop's plotline is very disjointed from the main games, and while its Godseeker does expand on the main plot, it does so in a very disjointed and jarring way, leaving even more questions than before. I think I speak for lots of players when I say I'd have preferred if the last DLC added more to the experience overall, maybe a whole new area, more charms, abilities, etc. However, seeing how Hollow Knight's focus lies in its gameplay, that is more than enough to consider this game a masterpiece despite its shortcomings. The strength of this game far surpasses any of its flaws, and even as I type this review, it stands unparalleled in its gameplay, presentation, and story polish. Sure, many others have come close, or arguably even surpassed it on individual elements, but as a complete package, Hollow Knight delivers brilliantly on all fronts. So much so that its heavily anticipated sequel, Silksong, has been kicked down the road for so long that the fandom has entered a worse withdrawal than an alcoholic crackhead lost in the Sahara. I suspect the reason, or at least one of the main reasons for such delay, is that Team Cherry themselves feel the pressure of the public's expectations that the sequel should be as good, if not better, than Hollow Knight, and that's a very tall order. Regardless of what Team Cherry is cooking for Silksong, even if it's just more of the same, as a proud Metroidvania addict, I say bring it on, and one surely can't complain about hoarding more masterpieces. That's all I have for today. Now, I want to hear your thoughts about the game or any other feedback you might have. Leave a comment below, and if you like my content, give a thumbs up, subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon. It's just $1. See you next time.